the oppressions that are done under the sun. Are we okay? And none, I didn't give my sound man the okay, so he was checking with it. And behold, the tears of such as were oppressed. They had no comforter, and on the side of their oppressors there was power, but they had no comforter. Wherefore I praise the dead, which are already dead, more than the living, which are yet alive. Yea, better is he than both they which hath not been, who has not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. Now, when he talks about under the sun, he's talking about looking at things from earth's viewpoint, not God's, but always he's used that phrase several times and will continue to use that in the book of Ecclesiastes. Seeing things from man's viewpoint, not God's. So when he talks about looking at it from under the sun, matter of fact, Persians actually worshiped the sun. And there were such of these in his day that was worshiping the sun. Matter of fact, the Persians believed that their God rode upon the arrows that lightning brought down and would take it to their enemies. And I mean, that's just what the Persians believed. And so they believed in worshiping the sun also. There are several people that do that today, and they are no better for it because they do not know the Lord God and they do not know how to worship him. So he said, oppression. That's the cruel unjustness done to people by governments or people in power. So Solomon said there's satisfaction in our work. He starts out saying that, but there's no satisfaction when we are treated wrongly and when people take advantage of us because they have the power to do so. And the government set up laws. They don't expect that those laws a lot of times, especially if they're an uncorrupt leader, to help people, but they want to help themselves. And they have kickbacks by making certain laws. They don't help the people under them, but they help themselves. And that happened under this previous, not the one now, but the previous administration. And they're still talking about the corruption that was done, that the son and several members of the family did something they were not supposed to do. They did what's called quid quo pro, which means they tell a leader of another nation, if you don't do what we want you to do, you're not going to get any money from us. If you do what we want you to do, and one of those things was to set up the son, who had no experience in what he was doing whatsoever, and other members of the family. And so they did not care when they quit drilling oil here and we had to buy it from the Arabs. They didn't care how much that gas got. It would have, if President Trump had not got into office again, we would have had to pay $5 and $6 a gallon for gasoline. There's no doubt in my mind, because the Arabians is who we were getting it from. When the previous administration said, we're not going to drill anymore. We don't believe we ought to drill. We're not going to do that anymore. We eliminated all those jobs. Then he said, we're not going to get involved with coal anymore. Well, coal makes up a lot of jobs, and a lot of factories and businesses are run by coal, clean coal. They said, we're not buying that anymore. But we had to buy all this from other nations to operate if we're going to operate. And so he's talking about oppressions, cruel, unjust treatments done under the sun. And behold, the tears of such as were oppressed. They had no comforter, and on the side of their oppressors there was power, but they had no comforter. Cruel, unjust treatment was ministered to them, and nobody seemed to care. Nobody ever came to their aid and said, hey, I hear you're having a hard time. We're going to do something about it. No such thing happened. Wherefore I praise the dead, which are already dead, more than the living. The reason why is so the dead cannot be oppressed anymore. They're gone. There's no way they can be oppressed. And so they're saying that he's saying the dead are better off than the living because now they've escaped oppression. Yea, better is he than both they which hath not been, who hath not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. So he's saying, better is he than both they that had not been born yet, because it was better not to have been born than to know unjustness. So that's what he's saying. Better to not have been born than to see all the evil work, all the oppression done under the sun. Again, I considered all travail and every right work, that for this a man is envied of his neighbor. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. Now, travail is painful, laborious effort that you have to do in order to make a living. And sometimes it's the stress of what the employer wants you to do that causes travail. But he said, I considered all travail and every right work, that for this a man is envied of his neighbor. And so to be envied is something that should not be, especially with God's people, but it was. Envy manifested itself in a way that they were discontent and they were resentful of the men and women who worked and had a job when they didn't. And working is vanity without the satisfaction of knowing that you're doing something that is honest, you're doing something that is right, and you're doing something that will supply the needs for your family. That's a good thing. But when people are cruelly in a job and being oppressed in a job, that's not a good thing. He said, I considered all travail, verse 4, every right work, that for this a man is envied of his neighbor. And so the neighbors were envious of those who had a job, envious because they had work and they didn't. But envy manifests itself usually when someone is discontent or resentful of another. The method and measure of our work is a lot of times infested with jealousy. Jealousy over you got a job and other people wanted it. When I got out of the Air Force, one of the first jobs I had was working at Alcoa Aluminum. I had a couple of jobs before that, but I eventually wanted to get there because that was one of the better paying places in Richmond, Indiana. And I hired in on a grunt job of doing maintenance. I didn't mind the work. It wasn't the work. It was when we didn't have any work. And I told the foreman, I said, here we are. We're working sometimes as hard as we can for 4 hours, 5 hours maybe. Then we don't have any work. We need to have work. He said, just stay out of sight. Just go back and find yourself a place to hide. Well, I didn't like that. I said, I liked the job, but I came here to work. I didn't come here to hide. I said, I'm not going to work. So I bid on a job that the requirement was you had to pass a test. And there were people that wanted the job. It was in a tool crib that had a lot more seniority than what I had. But they said it's based on how good you do on the test. Personnel director came back and he said, you've got the highest score of anybody we've ever had that took that test. He said, there's people who's got 25 years seniority wants that job, but they can't have it because they didn't test high enough. And man, there was jealousy. You want to know about jealousy? Oh my goodness. There was a lot of jealousy over the fact that I got that job. But they posted it on the board, what the scores were. They posted it. And so they could see that I had the highest score and I got the job. It's a good job. In the tool crib, you handed out tools to everybody. You had an 8-hour job. You cut the steel because Alcoa made all the machines for every part that they manufactured. So they made the machines. You had to saw steel bars. Some of them were about that big around, 8, and it'd take a while to saw through with a diamond blade. And others were smaller parts, of course, smaller steel bars. So we had all these bars in a metal rack. And then we had a chain hoist. We would get the chain hoist, hook it onto the bar, and take it and move it to where our saw was, put it down on the saw, and then set the saw for whatever the machine assembly department asked us to saw them in. And I love doing the sawing. A lot of people didn't. But I like doing it. I like getting the tools and getting the parts out. But anyway, it had to do with a lot of people being overly jealous and envious, and they went and wrote up grievances and complained, and there was nothing they could do because the company had said this is the requirement of anybody working in there. They have to have the highest test score of anybody. It's not on, I don't know if it's right or wrong. I'm not saying, I'm just saying that was their policy. That it was based on the test score. And then goes on to say the fool folds his hands together and eats his own flesh. Now, what he's saying here, because this man is lazy, he folds his hands. In other words, he doesn't put his hands to anything that will amount to a job or any effort. He folds his hands. He destroys his own self. He doesn't actually eat his flesh, but he's destroying himself as if he did eat his own flesh by not working, by being lazy. So he said, I saw this fool. He folded his hands together and he ate his own flesh. Now, he didn't literally eat his own flesh. He just was not involved in any kind of worthwhile work. So he destroyed himself by his laziness. Then he goes on to say, better is a handful with quietness than both the hands full with travail and vexation of spirit. What he's saying is a hand full of success or full of money is better than two hands full that has frustration and strife and envy. So one hand, all he's saying is it's better to have half as much with peace and tranquility than to have double that where there is anxiety and stress and jealousy. The pain of attempting to acquire double sometimes would cause people to have heart attacks. And I've never stressed about a job ever in my life. I've always had a job. I always had good jobs. God always got me jobs. Never, ever had to stress. 1 year when I was single, I had 19 different jobs because in the paper, there would be a job every week that would offer more money. So I would quit the job, didn't pay as much, and go get another job. And if I didn't like it, I'd go get another. And their jobs was plentiful, plenty of jobs over in Richmond, Indiana. It was a very industrious city. But then when I got married, I wanted to have one job. And I worked that job at Alcoa and the tool crib until I surrendered to preach. Then I went to Pontiac, Michigan, and I worked various jobs there. Finally worked at Truck and Coach, where you make the buses and the trucks. That's the department of General Motors I worked in, where they made the bus parts and the truck parts. So we had 18 wheelers that we put out on the assembly line, and we had buses that we built and put out on the assembly line. And I liked both of those jobs. But he's saying here that better, now get this verse, is a handful with quietness than both hands full with travail and vexation of spirit. For painful labor is a frustration of mind. If you have that, then it's better just to have half as much. Does that make sense to you? Person that has half as much and doesn't have any stress or painful travail is better. Then he goes on to say in verse 7, I returned and saw vanity under the sun. Now that phrase, vanity under the sun, is an unsatisfied desire for more. I saw this vanity under the sun, that man had a desire for more. Riches didn't satisfy, though. It tells us that. Then he goes on into this, two is better. There is one alone, and there's not a second. Yea, he hath neither child nor brother. Yet is there no end of all his labor. Neither is his eye satisfied with riches, neither saith he, for whom do I labor, and bereave my soul of good? This is also vanity, yea, it's a sore travail. Now, many times in Ecclesiastes, when you read vanity, it means meaningless or pointless. So he said, this is pointless. And when you read vexation of spirit, you read trouble of mind. The mind is so troubled that it can't think. So he's talking about here that you have this bereavement that's going on in your mind as if there's a death taking place. That's how bad it is. Pointless because you're alone. Now, two's better than one. He goes on to tell you that. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. In other words, two people can have two paychecks. And my wife and I, we've worked, both of us, most of our life doing something. And we've made it okay. We are sometimes had low-paying jobs. I started churches that, or took churches that had, could not pay me a full salary. And so I got a job usually. And sometimes my wife got a job. And I got her trained, going with me when I was selling cemetery properties. Easiest thing I ever did, the best thing, one of the best things I ever did outside of surrendering to preach. And so she worked for a while our church was growing. She worked as a counselor. And what she did is she counseled people on how to save money that already had cemetery property. And that's mostly what she did. But she also went into the homes and did what I did and present the facts of how you could get your funeral out of the way. By the way, we have ours out of the way. You don't have to worry about it. It's already paid for and taken care of. We saved the money, squirreled it away. And we've always wanted to do that. And we finally did that. I don't want my boys to have to worry about if I die, taking care of my funeral. I don't want to leave that burden on them. So my wife and I said, we're not going to do that. If we have to do without some things, we'll do without, but we're going to take care of our funeral arrangements. And we have. And it's a good thing. That stress is gone. There's no stress there. But he says, two are better than one because they have a good reward of their labor. See that reward for their labor? Two paychecks, two benefits for working. And then he goes on to say, here's another reason why two are better than one. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falls, for he hath no another to help him up. He has not another to help him up. Now, I've fallen a couple of times myself. Lost my balance, got up too quick. I bumped my nose on my wife's dresser a couple of times, got up during the night. I've learned now to sit there for a few minutes, not get up, not leave until I have my bearings. But does he have to leave? Okay, just wondering. So anyway,
You too.
what's that?
He said, have a good day, and I said, you too.
Okay. So two people,
Excuse me.
if they're alone and one of them falls, they don't have anybody to help them up. I don't know about you, but as you get older, you have a hard time getting up if you fall. I fell not too long ago in the bathroom. It's been a couple years ago. No, it was in my garage. And I had a hard time, and I wondered, why don't my wife check on me? Here I am out here in the garage, and I can't get up. And I'm trying, I'm praying, I'm trying to get up. Have you ever had that happen? And I couldn't get up. I mean, if my life depended on it, I couldn't get up. I was trying with all my might. And I finally prayed and I said, Lord, help me find out a way I can support myself. I was in front of the bumper of my car. I was cleaning some bugs off the front of my car. And I bent over and lost my balance and I fell down. And when I fell down, I couldn't get up. And so I couldn't use the front of my bumper to get up or I would pull the whole grill out. And I couldn't use my workbench. My workbench was right there because I would pull it down. And I was having a hard time. And I kept saying, Lord, let my wife check on me. Let her at least call a neighbor or somebody to help me get up. I was there probably for 20 minutes. And finally, after prayer, found a way I could, my right knee, I had a what is it called? Meniscus go out, had it operated on. It's so weak, it wouldn't support me. If it would not have fallen out from under me, I would have been able to get up okay. But finally, after 20 minutes of prayer, I finally was able to get a ladder. And it was there all the time, but I didn't see it. It was hanging. It wasn't hanging up, but it was leaning against the wall. And so I got my right arm on the third rung of that ladder, pushed myself up, and got myself to where I could get halfway up. And then I went onto another rung of the ladder, got both hands, pulled myself up with that. I said to my wife, I said, don't you ever check on me? I said, I've been out there all this time. I couldn't get up. And then you know what she does? She starts laughing. Yeah, she laughs about everything. Oh, my soul. We have a good relationship, but here's all he's saying. If one falls, Flo Abney, the one will lift up his fella. But woe to him that has nobody to lift him up when he falls. Woe to that person. Again, if two lie together. Now, my wife don't like this, but it's biblical. They have heat if two lie together. But how can one be warm alone? Boy, in the wintertime, because my wife has heat like a furnace come off her body. And I'll take my cold feet sometimes and I'll put them on her legs and she'll say, get those cold feet off of me. No, I can't get them off because they got to get them warm. Only way I'm going to get them warm is keep them right there. And she'll finally relent and let me put them on her legs and I'll get warm. But this is biblical that you do that. Stan, when your feet gets cold, just put them on her legs. Hers are cold. That won't help then. Hers is always warm. Oh, man. And if one prevail against him, two shall withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. Now he's saying if you're attacked, if an intruder attacks you, two people armed are better than one that's alone. And I tell you, ladies, if you're alone, you need to have today two things: pepper spray in your purse and a small pistol. I'm not telling you that you have to be angry and shoot somebody, but for your own safety, you need to have those two things because they are taking people's purses, trying to. They're taking their cars. Don't ever leave your car running and step away from it out here. Always have somebody watch it. Don't start it until you're ready to leave because they're watching and they'll take your car. Believe me, they will take it. And don't leave your car unlocked. We learned that out the hard way, didn't we, Miss Kay? We never leave our car unlocked. Yeah. Anyway, he's saying if one prevail against him, two shall withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. You can take thread, you can double it up again, and you'll have a hard time breaking that thread. Even threefold strand of thread is tough to break. And all he's emphasizing here is the benefit of two people watching out and protecting each other. And I look out for my wife. She looks out for me. And I'm guarantee you that we don't want anybody to ever have to come at us or break into our home. But if they ever do, we've got protection. And we know that it's there. I've told my wife when I'm gone, it's there. And if somebody breaks in, you just point a shotgun at them. They're not going to stay. They know what a shotgun will do. And if a woman points a shotgun, they know that all she has to do is pull that trigger. And all she has to do is point it at them. They'll usually leave. And I told my wife, I said, you don't even have to shoot it. If you just point it at somebody, they're gone. You ladies, you have protections at your house? Because you ought to. Every one of you ought to have some type of protection. It's just the day we live in. And he's telling us scripturally that it's better, though, if you have another person with you. Then he goes on to say in verse 13, better is a poor and a wise child than an old and foolish king who will no more be admonished. One of those kings that would not be admonished was King Saul. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, God told Samuel, when you go down there and fight the Amalekites, I want you to take everything and destroy it. Don't keep anything. And don't keep any spoil. Don't keep any of those alive. Don't keep any animals. Destroy everything. Because he hated the Amalekites because they were idol worshipers. Some of the idol worship they did had to do with when they went to the temple, there was such a thing as temple prostitutes. And so they had adultery with these temple prostitutes. And God hated it. He told them to kill Amalekites, don't make any peace with them, get rid of everything they have. Well, Samuel knew because God told him that Saul had not destroyed everything. And so he went there and he said, as soon as he saw Samuel, he had a guilty conscience. He said, I've done all that the Lord told me to do. And Samuel said, then what means the bleating of these sheep and the lowing of these oxen in my ear? Oh, he said, the people, they wanted to keep back the best so they could offer up sacrifices. Samuel said, to obey is better than sacrifice. God will much rather have you obey him than these sacrifices he told you to get rid of. Then he says, to hearken or to obey is better than the fat of rams. Now, the fat off of a ram was a choice piece that they put up before God, and the smoke of that went up to him as a sweet smelling savor. So it was a choice of the sacrifice. Now, I don't like fat myself, but a lot of people in the Philippines, they can actually buy chunks of fat, and they sometimes have what's called fat soup. Now, I don't like it. I told them I don't like fat. I don't like fat soup. I don't like fat. But they actually sold blocks of fat for that reason. And there's a lot of things they sold in the Philippines that I'm not real crazy about, but I've ate. But my wife, no, she wouldn't eat it if it meant they went to hell. Then they just go to hell because she's not going to eat that. Balut was one of the things that they like to have you eat. And if you've never had balut, they take an egg, 17 days, 19 days at the most. Egg will hatch at 21 days. So they take it and boil it, or they bury it in the sand. One of the two. When you crack into the balut, there's a broth. I like the broth. I really did. There's a broth. Underneath there is an egg sack with a partially developed chicken or hen. Now, the egg sack is a bright, usually green, yellow, orange. And then that's either a chicken or a duck, depending on what they got the egg from. You can eat that little, it's fine bones, and keep a feather and pick your teeth later. But that's what balut is. Now, my wife would never eat balut. She says, there's no way. I said, but Flo, people are going to lose confidence in you. Well, I don't care if they lose confidence in me. I'm not eating that balut. Now, she wouldn't eat it, no matter what. My boys and I, we would eat it. They usually about every couple of times a year, special celebrations, they would get the balut out. And they would say, you going to have some, Pastor? Absolutely. I'm going to have some. Okay. They thought that was the greatest thing because I was able to eat balut with them. Well, I can eat about anything. Now I say about anything. There's some things I really ate that I didn't really care for. I didn't care for octopus. I didn't like it. I didn't like eel. I wanted to try anything that they had. And so I didn't care for those things. The more you chew an eel, the rubbery it gets and the fatter it gets. I could not get that stuff past my teeth, those eels. So I couldn't eat them. I just really couldn't. But they ate them. They eat eels. They had roasted grasshoppers. And I said, well, I've ate everything else. I might as well try that. And so I'm going to tell you something. There's not bad. It tastes a little bit like something that maybe a burnt French fry, because they're real crispy. And you pick off the legs. I didn't like the legs, but the rest of it, what is it? Yeah, it tasted good. You've ate it before? Yeah. But I could eat roasted grasshoppers. But I'm going to tell you something. When you go out of this world as a missionary, you're subject to every kind of food group there is. Most of it I like. Then he goes on to say in verse 13, better is a poor and a wise child than an old and foolish king who will no more be admonished. Now, I told you, I think that the poor and foolish king was Saul in the Bible. David, he was the young, and he was the one that the people gravitated to. David was wise in most of his dealings until his affair with Bathsheba, which cost him dearly. But he had rededicated his life to the Lord, humbled himself, God chastened him, and God was able to use him again. But his sons never did forgive him. The one that turned against him was his son Absalom. And I think that's who he's talking about in verse 15. I considered all the living which walk under the sun, with a second child that shall stand up in his stead. So the second child that would stand up in David's stead would be Solomon. But before Solomon, Absalom tried to usurp the throne by deceit, and he was killed. And so Absalom is the one, I think, that he's talking about that came after, and he was born in the kingdom. He was born in the house of David, but he became poor. He became poor because he was not legally God's choice to ascend to the throne. So when he died absolutely with nothing. And he could have had everything as a king's son, but because he tried to usurp the throne, he became poor and he died. He said, I considered all the living which walk under the sun, with a second child that shall stand up in his stead. Now Solomon had two sons, Jeroboam and Rehoboam. And both of those boys were selfish. Both of them only cared about each other. And one son ended up killing the other son. I'll let you find out about it because it's found in 1 Kings chapter 11. We won't have time to turn there. But it tells you about these two boys. It tells you how that one of them comes to a bad end. But he goes on to say there's no end, notice verse 16, of all the people, no end of all leaders that come and go, even all that have been before them. In other words, what they have done has been done before. That's true of most kings in the East. What they did, others have done before them. And this also is true that those that come after shall not rejoice in him, especially if he was a bad leader. Surely this is vanity. Vanity means meaningless or pointless, and it's vexation of spirit or frustration of mind and spirit. There's no end of all the leaders, good and bad, that have come down even in our generation. And the leaders here are appointed differently than leaders in other nations are. But that says they shall not rejoice in him because they become disillusioned and despondent because they have not done anything to help them or to care about their problems. Now, we have a president that does care. And I'm glad that they have tried to console and encourage the widow of Charlie Kirk every way they can. I think it's right. And I think it's humbling that we have a president. And I'm glad that we have one that can humble himself, go out of his way to help those that are killed and to go and try to console the survivors. He's gone out of his way to go to Israel to get those hostages returned. I guess finally they've agreed to do it. They haven't done everything they said they would do yet. They never do, though. But he's got them to agree to bring back those living hostages and hopefully the remains of those that are dead. They said they would release them. They just haven't done that yet. But for 2 years, they had these hostages, tortured them. I know for a fact that they raped the women. I know for a fact that's what they do. And they just made their life miserable. They lost weight. They would prefer to be dead, but they just barely kept them alive, didn't feed them. Most of them came back a lot skinnier than what they were when they became a hostage because they didn't have to feed them. They fed them enough just to keep them alive. Now, I want to tell you, that's a wicked generation. The Hamas, Palestinians, they don't care about human life. All they want is to get their way. God promised the land. Here's the thing about it. He promised that land to Israel. And God said that he would bless those that bless Israel. He would curse those that curse Israel. And it's a good thing for a president to try to help Israel because that's God's chosen people. The Palestinians have been a thorn in their flesh. God never gave them the land that he gave to Abraham. And he told Abraham when he went from Ur of the Chaldees, that's found in Genesis chapter 15, I'll bless you and I'll bless you and all your children as long as you're obedient to me. And I'll give you the land. And God has given them the land. He told them what the land would be. Told the children of Israel when they came out of Egyptian bondage. He said, you take this land. If I drove everybody out beforehand, the land would end up in weeds and everything would deteriorate. But I'll drive them out when you go in there. I'll be with you. You drive out all these worshipers of idols, and I don't want you to make allegiance with any of them. Now, one group of people, and I'll talk to you about that sometime, played a trick on Israel. They pretended they came from a long distance. They came with moldy bread, and they came with shoes and clothes that were tattered and torn, indicative of somebody coming from a far place. But they weren't from a far place. They was from the next province that God said to destroy. And they came and they said, we have come a long way. You see how our bread's moldy, our shoes and clothes wore out? They said, where's your nation? They said, oh, it's way, 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 way across the sea. We come a long ways, but we want to make allegiance with you. After they made the allegiance, they found out it was the neighbor they were supposed to destroy. And they said, well, because we already said we would make allegiances with you, we can't destroy you. We'll just make you drawers of water and hewers of wood. And to this day, the Bible said that's what they became. But in all essence, they were not supposed to survive. The reason is all these women that was indoctrinated in this false idol worship, every one of them had a strong influence on their husband. Solomon began serving God, and God blessed him with everything anybody could ever want. But he married all these wives, and many of them were idol worshipers. And in the end, they turned his heart to their idol worshiping instead of turning to God. And you'll read about that. I'll have you read about that at some time. But I want to stop here. And if you have any questions anytime, you can come to me and ask me about it. If it's not clear what I had to say, then just ask me about it. I don't mind. But let's have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. 2 is better than 1. You gave us the reasons why 2 are better than 1. 2 can be stronger than 1 person can be against an intruder. 2 people can help each other keep warm when it's cold. And the heat may go out, but there could be warmth with 2 people together. There also is the benefit of 2 paychecks. 2 paychecks are better than 1 paycheck. And also the strength and encouragement of 2 people is better than somebody being alone. We read about a man in this chapter that was alone, and he had nobody to encourage him. He had nobody to share incomes with, and he became a workaholic. And so that's not a good thing, because it said he had no time for his soul's need. He couldn't even go to church. He worked, became a workaholic because he was alone. Loneliness can do that. And Lord, I thank you that we have people today, they've learned how to, even though they're alone, they've learned how to include you in everything. So they're really not alone when you're with them. You are with them. You promise you'll be with them until you take them home. And I thank you for each one that's came tonight. I thank you for these who are going to come forward and make it official that they want to become a member of this church. And we thank you, Lord. We don't take that lightly, that people want to unite with us. So I pray you would bless tonight and take us to our home in safety. I pray in Jesus' name. And God's people said, Amen. Amen.